I'm just curious, like the strategy as an owner. Number one is like, how do I, what is the strategy? Number two, like, how do I execute that strategy to have it make sense? I mean, the whole idea behind this episode is growing my business through M&A. So that has an underlying assumption, which is number one, you have a strategy.
This is the PMP Industry Insider Podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome out to another episode of the PMP Industry Insider Podcast, where we look at what is changing in the industry and we take you to the front lines of those that are driving those changes. As always, my name is Donnie, Shelton, owner of Triangle Home Services, which has Triangle Pest and Triangle Lawn. With me is the world-renowned Mr. Dan Gordon. Dan, would you like to say good morning, introduce our topic, say hello to our sponsor, and then I've got so much to talk about on this episode. So yeah, let's get into it.
So for anybody who's not been listening, Donnie has to go through everything, like say, mention the sponsor, go through all of that. So anyway, my name is Dan Gordon. I have to give him a
checklist so he doesn't forget. So
yeah. So my name is Dan Gordon. I'm a managing member of PCO Bookkeepers, an accounting firm that caters to pest and lawn companies, as well as PCO M&A specialists, a firm that does exit planning, mergers and acquisitions for pest control companies and lawn companies as well. We've closed several lawn deals. So let's talk about our sponsor. Consider supporting them. This episode is sponsored by Coalmarch by WorkWave. Learn more at coalmarch.com. So let's talk about what our topic is today. So this is the hot, everybody's talking about M&A and what multiples are, and they want to sell their company, and a lot of people are and whatnot. But what happens if you want to expand your company by M&A? Can you do it versus the big boys? So I wrote a little paragraph. Let me read it.
Hang on. Before you read this paragraph, ladies and gentlemen, just let me put a nice disclaimer out. This is not ChatGPT generated content. I validated that and also confirmed it before we started this episode. So Dan, with that.
Yes, this is a collection of articles that I've written, some stuff. We do quite a bit. We're pretty active in the M&A market, mainly on the sell side. We've, over the past several years, have done close to $1 billion in sell side transactions at some of the highest valuations in pest control industry history. And this year in particular, even though it's a slow year, we've had some pretty big deals, some blockbuster deals. Obviously, some of the companies don't announce for a while, but you'll be hearing about some of them. So anyway, okay, so we do sell side. We help you sell your company if that's what you want to do. But if you don't want to do that, if you maybe want to buy, so all the big boys are doing it. The valuations can be rich, but if you want to get in the M&A game, how do you compete against the big guys and the PE firms? It's the PE firms right now that are really, really starting to drive up values, whereas the big guys are who were driving those values up a year or two ago are kind of laying back, and it's the PE guys. But sometimes
a deal. But before you go to that, though,
sure,
it is interesting. And this is, again, this is just observation. I have been very surprised at how active PE has been in lawn as of late. Yeah, I mean, big PE. This has been a change, right? And I don't know, and Dan, obviously you're a lot closer to this game than I am. I have friends, and I mean, I don't do deals per se. But, it started with pest, and we started getting really good multiples. Then we started getting tons of activities because obviously if you put multiples up, if someone's on the fence, they're like, yep, I'm out. And so we've seen a ton of activity, but now I'm starting to see it on the lawn side. I'm like, oh my gosh, what is going on? I even got a couple of phone calls from my little lawn care company, which by the way is nothing to brag about. I love my lawn people. If anyone from our company's listening to this, when I say little in comparison to the size of our pest business, it's pretty small. So yeah.
I mean, the answer is it's interesting because when we started doing this M&A stuff over 10 years ago, we looked at pest control. And quite honestly, the way that the landscape worked was you had, Terminix and Rollins, right? Those are two American companies who kind of dominated the US market. And then you had Anticimex come over from Sweden, right? And they started to buy up companies. Actually, before that, you had Rentokil come over from London. They started to buy up companies. And so now you've got this war between all of these big guys pushing valuations up. Now, remember, the model is 50 to 55% gross margin, recurring, non-recurring is 70, 80%, whatever, right? And so it's a great business. And you've got these two foreign entities that are coming over and buying up American companies. And I always wondered, because we work with a lot of lawn care companies, the P&L is roughly the same. Is lawn care a little bit more difficult? You've got storage issues. You've got bigger equipment that break and things like that. But
okay, hang on. Whoa. Lawn
Yeah.
care is a lot more difficult. I'm just going to say it. Keep going.
It is, but if you look at a P&L, forget about
Yes.
the
Financially
struggle,
speaking, you're
right?
100% correct.
It's exactly the same.
Yes,
so
I agree with
so
that.
you wonder why why weren't the valuations driven up? And a lot of people say, well, the attrition rate is higher in lawn care and things like that. But I look at it as, you've got these four, call it Terminix, Rollins, Anticimex, and Rentokil, really driving this thing over the past several years and pushing it up. And you didn't have that in lawn. You had True Green's owned by private equity. And they were very, hey, we're going to pay what we're going to pay, and that's it.
Yeah. So what you're saying is the difference is competition. It's not necessarily the financials.
And it's funny because True Green is not, they're not doing the kind of M&A that they were doing a few years ago because they were the only game in town. You now have several PE firms that are rolling it up quickly, and the valuations are significantly higher, more than double what they were a year and a half ago.
Well,
so
I will say this. If someone could have recorded my face when I got a phone call about my lawn care, I'm like, what? The last phone call I expected to get.
These PE firms are so aggressive, so much more aggressive than the strategics. You'll get a letter from Rollins, you'll get a letter from, but these guys are at the meetings. They are, we do lots of business with them, so I don't mean to insult them. They're very smart guys, but they're not industry people. They're financial people.
Yeah, they're spreadsheet
people. And they are aggressive, which bodes well for you if you want to sell your lawn care company or pest company, because they're very active in pest as well. But anyway, let me finish.
Let's get in it. Yeah, let's get in it.
So how do you compete against the big boys and the PE firms? Sometimes if a deal is small, it may be unattractive to the larger players, or sometimes there may be problems with the business that a local operator could cure with some time and effort, but the larger guys just don't want to be bothered with it, right? So today, let's talk about how to go about purchasing one of these companies, right? So a lot of what I do is on the sell side. Like I said, we are, inundated with work. Last several years have been busier than heck, but we also do, we'll also do buy side due diligence. So if you find a target, we'll go through the process with you, and we don't take a commission. We charge an hourly or a fixed fee to do that work. And so that is a good way of expanding. So anyway, today let's talk about how to purchase one of these companies. The M&A process can be complex, involves several stages from beginning to end, but it's a process with multiple steps. So let's explore the process from beginning to end.
Let me expand a little bit on what you just said there, because I think it's important. Number one, for listeners out there, I view M&A as an owner, meaning as a buyer, as I would marketing on the digital side, mainly because, obviously everyone knows I grew up on the digital, and I say grew up, meaning I grew our business with digital. And what that means is that you're not going to fight Goliath in hand-to-hand combat. So meaning that I'm not going to go against Orchid. I'm not going to go against Rentokil. If I have a target company and it comes out to who can struck the largest check, I'm going down every time.
Yep.
I
Yep.
am going
And
down
that,
every single time. So,
right.
so what that means is that if you want to do M&A, which I think is a lot of opportunity to do that, you have to play a different game, right? Because you can't, and I mean, and Dan was 100% correct that there are some targets out there that these larger companies are not going to want to deal with. Like they're not going to want to deal with small companies, usually like under a million. Maybe they will. It's kind of rare.
They
They're not going to.
will, but sometimes scratch and dents. Like I've talked to, the M&A directors at all the big guys, and they used to buy companies that were, having problems, big problems, to turn them around, and it didn't work, right? So they
Yeah.
want good company. They'd rather have good companies that and pay up for them so that they
Right.
don't have to do that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
that leaves an opportunity for you, the small guy, to be able to do some turnarounds. But Donnie, you did a small one a long time ago, and that
Oh
was a
gosh.
turnaround. And here, why don't you tell
Yeah.
us your story?
So
Even though this isn't in the script, but go ahead.
yeah. Story time. No. So I will tell you, I have done a few of these. When I say a few, I think maybe 4, 5, maybe. I have to think back. And I've had some. I've had one that I recently did that I learned. I mean, this is like most things, right? When you when you make all the mistakes in the book, even a blind squirrel gets lucky every now and then. My latest one has been fantastic. It has been a great fit. It's worked really well. It's enhanced our business. Great. I've had others that were so bad that I literally gave it back and said, please, just take it. It's
Right.
like
Right.
and I've had some in between. I've had some that I've done where it worked. It was okay. It wasn't great. But here's what I will tell you. The biggest thing I have learned in M&A is, at least for me, if you're going to take on a smaller company, you really need to make sure. And Jack Welch said this, and I probably should have listened because I heard him, but I didn't pay attention to him, meaning I read it in the book. He said, the worst acquisitions I ever did. And if you don't know who Jack Welch was, he's the CEO of GE, led it to be a multi-billion-dollar company, yada, yada, yada. He said the worst acquisitions I ever did were ones where the culture was not aligned with our culture. And I can amen brother that one, because the one that I gave back, the customers were all old. None of them had a credit card on file. It was such a disaster trying to integrate that company. Like we never really got there. And one day, like a year into it, I realized 80% of our time on our team was focused on something that we could sell out. Like this acquisition was so small, we could sell the number of accounts that we bought in 1 month just online. And I'm like, we're done. This is it. Like
Right.
I brought the old owner back and I'm like, do you want this company back? He's like, yeah. I'm like, great, take it. It's all yours. And
There's
walked away.
there are certain things that you can correct, like bad routing,
Right.
even bad employees, but your customers, if they're not the right customers, if they won't buy into your programs, and if they won't buy into your pricing. Pricing
Correct.
is a very difficult problem to fix. The others you can fix, right? So if you're looking at a company that's not making any money and going, yeah, this is a great deal, and then you look at it and you say, well, that's because they're charging $50 an hour instead of 150. That one's a difficult one because you're going to have to get it up to that 150 or whatever your acceptable dollar per hour is. And in doing so, when you start doubling people's prices or giving them a 25 or 30% increase, sometimes it doesn't go well.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. And I will contrast with another one that I did, which was, in this case, the seller, I personally knew the seller, and he legitimately designed his business for us for his last 3 years before he wanted to retire. And that, the service programs are very much alike. Customers are on credit cards. They were used to monthly billing. They were doing triennial service. All the things that we do as a business, he was already doing. And that one was a big success. And so I think probably the main takeaway from this is, as we get into this, because I think this is a great topic of how do you play in this game. That would be my thing that I have learned the most, which is if the culture isn't, like if your customer culture is not aligned, if your employees are a little different, right? Because you can sometimes, if it's small enough, you can do a tuck in. You may not have to retain any of them, but the reality of it is if your customers aren't like a part of your culture, part of your system, it's going to be a very difficult process to get it turned around. So with that, Dan, walk us through okay, so I want to tuck in a few smaller companies. I want to go out and I want to expand my business this way. Let's start with, first of all, how do I find those opportunities? And then let's get into the nuts and bolts of how you do that.
So I like finding opportunities through networking at the trade associations, state trade associations. But one of the best source for these are your distributors. The Forshaws, the Targets, the all of those guys, Saris. They deal with all of these smaller companies and they know who they are. So I've seen a lot of deals go through, where the chemical rep, actually sources it. But once you meet somebody, well, what's the first thing that you do? Well, you're going to ask for some pretty confidential information, and they have to be willing to give that over. So the first thing you want to do is have a non-disclosure agreement.
And they got to be able to
between you.
trust you.
They got to be able to trust you. And by the way, I've seen NDAs work very well, but even with big deals, I've seen them not work. I've seen leaks and things like that, and it's not good. But at least if you have this, and really, I like to have that non-disclosure regarding the information. But more importantly, if I'm going to go into due diligence or I want to talk to you about your customers or your employees, I want to make sure that you can't touch any of them. So that NDA has to have a non-solicit built into it. So that's one of those things. So
just for our listeners, hang on, just for our listeners, NDA's non-disclosure agreement. Basically, what an NDA says is that we're going to have this discussion, and no actions, no disclosures, no nothing from this discussion legally can be done. You were agreeing legally that I'm not going to discuss this with anyone. I'm not going to, and what Dan said is a non-solicitation. I'm not going to solicit. Like, once I learn all about your business, I can't take that information and either disclose it to other people or use it to an advantage. And it's a contract between both parties. And so, just to make sure everyone, I understand a lot of people know what an NDA is, but there's some who don't and don't understand like the purpose behind it, because they'll go in willy-nilly and start talking without any protections, right? Like, oh yeah, we can talk about that. It's like, don't do that. So,
well, the other thing is you get some of these guys who go to the meetings, the PE guys, some of the guys who are trying to source companies, and they start making offers before they even have any information. It's ridiculous. But
yes.
But so that NDA allows you to, once that's in place, that allows you to discuss anything, to talk about the deep dive that you're going to do. So, once you have enough interest between them, then, as part of the analysis, you have to do a deep dive. And usually you have a questionnaire. And if you're interested, we do this kind of work and we can get you some questionnaires, but just let us know. And the questionnaire basically gets you information. If you buy a car or a truck, you have tires, you can kick the tires, you can look at the truck, you can see dents, you can see scratches, but you're buying an intangible business. There's no tires to kick, there's no dents to look at, and that kind of thing. It's an intangible. So you have to be able to go under the hood and look at the financials, look at the information coming out of their CRM, that kind of thing. So once you get that that NDA, then you do a deep dive with questionnaire. Now, based on that
can I just add something here, Dan, because I think
yeah.
this is really important. On smaller companies, especially as you go through this process of, they call it due diligence. Okay. It's part of you kind of digging in and understanding what the business is about. I will tell you, there's two things I will say, two cautions I would give. Number one, the owner may not know what's really going on. I'm telling you right now. Don't take anything for granted. If you get this questionnaire back and it looks so pretty, like, I'm just telling you, the owner doesn't always know what is going on. So that's kind of my first disclaimer is, make sure that you get multiple opinions, as you did.
It's a great point. And even when the big guys are going to buy, like, we will prepare, it's not just a deep dive, but we prepare like a booklet, a marketing document to put out to market. And when we do that, and we ask for information from the owner. Oh, well, I'll just ask my assistant. Well, no, your
Right.
assistant can't find out about it because this is all
Correct.
secret and whatnot.
Correct.
And you're absolutely right. The owner may not really know what's going on in their business. So
Correct.
usually in a small business, though, if you're going to buy a small, like 1 or 2 routes or something, the owner's involved with everything. So
Yep. It is.
you
It is.
know,
I'm just telling you though, even at that level, I would still, that's my one disclaimer. The second thing I will tell you is, and by the way, I am guilty of this. So before I say this, don't go thinking that I'm sitting on some high horse and I'm in my ivory tower and I've got all this wisdom. I've got stupidity. And so hopefully all of you can benefit from my stupidity tax. The second thing is I did an acquisition one time without physically going and sitting at the branch. Now I had some folks on my team do that, but I did not do that. And so my second thing would be, and I know that sounds obvious, but if you do business in multiple states or multiple cities, sometimes it's like, oh yeah, I look at all I need. I've seen everything I needed to see. I've done everything I needed to do on that acquisition that I did with, without going there and physically like looking at everything. By the way, I got saved. And by the way, and this is not, Dan, you can pay me after this episode when I say this. Dan and I did this deal together and we built a huge safety margin. And we thought for sure that it was way conservative and that I wouldn't need it. And I used every bit of it. Like I remember, you know what deal I'm talking about, Dan. I'm not but I guess my point is like we had a lot of accounts that were, they called them saves or like cancel saves. So basically people would cancel, but they wouldn't cancel them. They would say, well, we're going to give you free service for 6 months or 8 months or even a year. And they were showing on the books as actual legitimate customers. And so had I gone there and actually pulled the list and done some talking, I would have realized that they were, again, luckily stepped in a pile of crap and came out smelling like a rose, but that may not always be the case. And so number one is that, disclaimer is when you do the deep dive, the owner may not know what's going on. Number two, you need to physically go there and just make sure you're validating what you are being told, from the financials, from the downloads from the, as far as customer database, those types of things. You really need to make sure that the due diligence part, I know this sounds obvious, but sometimes it's easy to sit back.
I highly recommend that you have an accountant
100%
dive with you. So,
yeah.
So anyway,
All
you
right.
get this deep dive, you get a lay of the land, you understand their revenue, their recurring versus non-recurring, how many trucks they have, everything about the company. And then it's time to make an offer. And the offer is done in what they call a letter of intent. Basically, it's just a letter. Hey, I'm offering to buy your company. It's non-binding. And there are certain things, basically, there's many elements to negotiate besides the money, right? And you got to be really careful because sometimes people get blinded by the money, but some of the indemnities and things, those are things that are hanging out to dry. But here, I made a list of things that go into a letter of intent. And again, you can contact us and we can put this up on the website. But key elements.
Can I add one thing to this that you're talking about, Dan? Because you saying this just reminded me of something. I have seen. First of all, this letter intent in my mind is probably one of the most important parts of doing M&A, because what you're doing is you're creating a construct, and once it goes to the attorneys, they're going to use the construct to decide and determine how much you pay and what the deal is going to look like. So if it's in your court to create this construct, you really need to think that through. And I have seen some large companies use this as I almost would say a marketing tool. They will throw out this ridiculous number that they're going to pay you. And then you start digging into the LOI and you realize, that's probably not going to happen. Well, that's really tight. And so essentially, if you're, some people would look at that and be like, oh my gosh, look at this multiple. And you start digging into the details and you're not getting that multiple.
The big earn out and everything else.
Exactly.
So basically, if you're selling your company, the buyer usually does the LOI.
Correct. Yes.
Again, we're going to be the buyer. This LOI, as I said, it's non-binding and things can be negotiated. But when the lawyers get together and create the contract, they go back to this LOI
Correct.
for anything that's unclear. So So here's where we're at, right? So the first thing, introduction, begin the letter by stating the purpose of the letter and providing a brief overview. The second is buyer and seller information, include all of legal names of the buyer and seller. Purchase price, state the purchase price that the buyer is offering to pay for the business. Like Donnie said, there could be multiple elements, right? So I'm going to pay you $1 million for this business, but I'm going to give you the opportunity to earn out another 300,000. Or I'm going to give you $1 million on this business contingent upon you doing 800,000 of recurring revenue or something of that sort, right? So the purchase price isn't always just a dollar figure. It could include an attrition clause. It could include a earnout clause. And those are things that you want to watch. The next is the payment terms, and that would be an initial deposit, subsequent payments, contingencies based on attrition and or earnout. But those are pieces that can be part of it, but don't need to. We've seen deals that are 100% cash up. That's it. The two owners knew each other very well. They knew the accounts. And maybe they got a good deal and it was 100% cash walk away. That's not usual, but it does happen. So the next one is the assets to be included. Describe the assets, right? It's going to be your customer list. It's going to be your accounts receivable, your inventory, any of the assets. Usually in pest control, we do what we call cash-free, debt-free. So you take out the cash from the bank account and you have to deliver all the vehicles and the company debt-free. So you're going to have to pay all those off, and you can pay them off at closing, right? But that's usually what you'll do. Is there any furniture? Is there any equipment? Whatever you're going to include in the deal, assets to be included. Liabilities. Describe any liabilities that you're willing to assume. Sometimes you can assume a truck lease instead of doing cash-free, debt-free. You can reduce the purchase price by that amount, and then you take over the payments. And then there's going to be a space for you to say, okay, this is all what we're going to do subject to due diligence. And then you give it a due diligence period. It can be 45, 60 days, whatever. And within that due diligence, basically what you're going to do is you're going to set up a data room, an electronic data room. And we do this for our clients all the time. And then within that data room, there are going to be certain requests that they want to see. And there's going to be folders. So, I'll go into what is in the due diligence in a minute, but, you're basically in the LOI saying, hey, we're going to go through due diligence. We have 45 to 60 days or whatever to do it. And we're allowed access to anything and everything that we want. Okay. Also confidentiality. You want another NDA, in the letter of intent, because you're really going to do that deep dive. And then something called exclusivity. Basically, once you sign this LOI, I'm going to give you, or I want exclusive rights to negotiate and make this deal happen. You can't be running around trying to negotiate another deal with another person, right? So that's that exclusivity. We usually see 90 to 120 days. Okay?
I was going to say, and explain why that's important, because I think this is a really important point of the LOI exclusivity.
It's important because I'm going to pay my accountant, I'm going to pay my lawyer, I'm going to put in a bunch of time to do your due diligence. And if you're double dealing, that's not fair, right? If I'm going to put up all this expense, I want to be able to go through the process.
Right.
And maybe it doesn't work out, and that's fine. And after that, then it's not exclusive anymore. But if it does work out, I don't want to have to be looking over my shoulder.
Correct. Yep. No, that is important because it's just a massive amount of time and money. When you go to purchase a company, everyone goes down the chute, and it is, it's disappointing when you go this far down and the deal doesn't work out, because that's a lot of time and money. Time with attorneys. It is, and it does happen. It absolutely does happen, and there's good reasons.
We've had deals fall through for various reasons. And so you've really got to make sure that you've got it together and that you're protecting yourself, because you're expending a whole bunch of time and effort and money to make this thing happen.
So real quick, before we get into due diligence and before, now that we're kind of finishing up the LOI, one of the things that I just want to make sure that, for our listeners, what do you think? Okay. I would say, the vast majority, there's what, 5 maybe big PE firms. There's probably 3 big kind of traditional companies that are doing the buying. There's some
there's a ton of PE firms. I just don't know how many are serious.
Yeah.
But you're right. There's like 5 who are real players.
And then you've got these,
but there's probably 100 of them. Yeah.
Yeah. So. And then you got these regionals that are, are doing deals like what we're talking about right now. If I'm a smaller company, and let's just say I start talking to my distributor, I'm talking to you, I'm talking to an accountant. It doesn't matter. Folks who are connected with people who may be interested in getting out. What specifically should I be looking for? Am I looking for companies that, or, we talked about the whole culture fit thing. Are we looking for companies that are doing pest? Are we doing lawn? There's obviously, commercial, I'm just curious, like the strategy as an owner. Number one is like, how do I, what is the strategy? Number two, like, how do I execute that strategy to have it make sense? The whole idea behind this episode is growing my business through M&A. So that has an underlying assumption, which is number one, you have a strategy.
Yeah, one of the things that, it used to be in the back of the magazines, but now it's, you'd see an ad, company, well-established company for 20 years doing $100,000, and you look at it and you go, okay, what have you been doing for 20 years?
Right.
So there's a reason why people are small, and it's not always that they're incompetent or that it's a bad company, although a lot of times it is. It could be a lifestyle business. There's 2 ways to make a lot of money in pest control, right? One is stay small, run the routes, do the whole thing you want, and the other is to grow big, right? And you get some guys and gals who are not interested in growing the thing. They want to work-life balance. They make good money doing what they're doing. The value of their business isn't that great, but the income can be great. So
they created a cash business.
Yeah. And if you run into one of these, that's a good one, right? Maybe somebody who's done it and now is ready to retire. And that's a nice business. Turnarounds are difficult. Remember, you can turn anything around except pricing is a very difficult one to turn around. But if you can do that, that's great too.
Any other red flags you can think of besides pricing? Because I agree with you. Pricing is good. Culture is good. I know in our case, the one that failed, meaning that the one I gave it back, one of the biggest challenges that we had was payment. We're very automated at Triangle. And by the way, if anyone listens to this podcast, we're a dumpster fire hot mess, just like everyone else. So I don't want to make anyone to think that we got it all figured out, but we do credit card billing, we do monthly billing, and we do triennial service. And we had a really big problem with these customers. They did not want to pay until after the service was completed. And even then they didn't want to pay. And then it was 60 days later after that. And so it was just a really big challenge, for us, it was like, if you're not on credit cards, if you're not doing monthly billing, maybe, but probably not. And I'm not telling you don't do a deal. I'm not saying it at all, right? Some companies, it's perfectly fine. That's how they operate. But for us, we had already gone so far down the road going that way. It was a huge distraction. Again, nothing wrong with that model, nothing wrong with buying a business that way. It was just for us. We were way down the road with credit cards and monthly billing, and it was just a huge distraction. Any other red flags that you can think of?
Well, there's 2. So I've been I've been in the industry for a very long time, almost 30 years. And there's 2 major innovations that happened in this industry. The first one was termite baits that turned the industry on. And the second is monthly credit card billing or, budget plans, right? Mm-hmm. And that's where the entire industry is going. And you're going to find that over the next several years that everybody's going to be like that, because carrying accounts receivable sucks, right?
It does.
You're worried about payday, how do I make payroll? How do I do the sales? All of this stuff. So this monthly billing is outstanding. So if you can get like an old time player who hasn't bought into it, you've got to look at those customers. Will they buy into it? Because it's important that you do that. Lack of profitability is a red flag because that means that your pricing's bad. Most people, in order to have people work for you, you've got to pay them a reasonable wage. So you're probably paying the reasonable wage. The other thing that's a big, big red flag, check out and see how they're paying their employees. If they are skirting minimum wage and or the outside sales exemption that is allowable in certain states,
Oh
if they're
gosh.
paying their technicians in cash after overtime, there's a million different things, right? If you don't structure this thing properly and that's going on, you could be taking on the liability, from the
Well, I want
government.
to add one caveat that you said to profitability. Um, it most likely is pricing. However, there could be a case where, Bobby's uncle and his brother, and then Bobby's wife works for and so they're paying all their family,
Yep.
and the pricing is fine, and you can clean it up by just taking the accounts, and you'll
Yeah,
immediately get a benefit. But just pay attention is all I would say.
that's a good situation. But
Yes.
that whole making sure that payment is being made properly,
Yes.
that everybody's not on a 1099,
Correct.
that, we're not after 40 hours, I pay you cash, or, you get a cash bonus. Be really careful with that stuff, because you're going to, depending on how you structure the deal, and I'm not a lawyer, but I've worked on enough of them, but I'm not going to give you legal advice. I can tell you that it's a big deal for the big guys when they come across a company that's doing great and everything looks great, except that how they pay their technicians is illegal. You can Google Rollins or Terminex or Rentokil. They've all had class action lawsuits against them based on improper payment. And then when the Department of Labor comes in, it gets really ugly. So just that's one of the big ones.
So we're getting close to the end here. We got through, strategy. We got through why you would want to do this. We got through an NDA and an LOI. Can you just talk through, like, the mechanics of doing a basic deal after that? And then
So
we can come on another.
Let's talk about a diligence real quickly. I have 13
Super
diligence
fair.
points
Yep.
where we're going to set up this data vault, and each folder, the folder names are going to be the organization. That's going to be your corporate papers, your certificate of organization, whatnot. Office lease, do you have it? Is it with a third party, or maybe you own the building or whatever? Vehicles, I want a list of vehicles, make, model, year, any loan or lease balances and the mileage. Operations, I want to see your licenses. I want to see your ops manuals if they're available, approved chemical lists, list of equipment, that kind of thing. If they'll give it to you, IT, I want your CRM credentials, your pest packs or suite, pest routes and whatnot. And I want your QuickBooks credentials. Some people won't give it to you. You just say, okay, then I want you to pull these certain reports. Any committed contracts that you have. Do you have a copier lease that goes out for 3 years? That kind of thing. Any customers that need assignment, right? That you can't just, you have big commercial accounts and you can't just flip them. They need to approve those. We'd like to see the insurance, the loss runs for the past 3 years. Are you guys running around playing, demolition derby, or, do you practice safe driving habits and things like that? Employee benefits. What does your benefit program look like? Want to see your income tax returns, your sales tax returns, your payroll tax returns. I want to know about any litigation or pending lawsuits, any violations with local government or regulators. So this is a real deep dive, this due diligence. So any environmental inquiries, like what's going on, have you had any spills or anything? And then finally, but probably first, is the banking. I want to see your bank statements. I want to see your sales journals, any accountants reports on financials, any attrition report that can tell me all of that. And all that stuff's going to be put into this data room. And again, when we do sell side, we do that for our clients. On buy side, we also set it up and make the requests for the target, so you can do that. And once we get through the diligence, let's say that everything checks out, then we say, okay, we're good, let's go. And then the attorneys start the definitive agreement, and that's where you'll get some negotiation, and attorneys like to
this is the best part of the deal.
Earning their money, right?
Yeah, this is where everyone loves each other.
Yeah. By the way, I always tell people there's something called deal fatigue, and it happens, and it's real. And by the end, everybody's like, "Screw it! I just don't want to do it. I don't. This is a horrible experience and whatnot." But at the end, it all works out. But
So
anyway,
I was going to say just another thing to add to this. So a couple of thoughts I had as you were talking. Number one, in due diligence, Dan is right. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in there that you would look at for these smaller deals. One of the things that we did, and again, I'm not giving legal advice, so I'm not telling you back up everything I say, get an attorney to actually dig into this. So, but if you're doing a tuck in, meaning that you're just going to take the accounts, you can get a good attorney to firewall a lot of these things because you're not picking up the company, right? You're not going, all you're doing are buying accounts, and get a good attorney to kind of firewall a lot of that stuff for you. I'm not telling you a firewall can't be broken and it can't be,
no, you're absolutely right.
but
So
that's a good way of doing it, especially on these smaller deals, right?
yeah, if you're not willing, like the records aren't available because you're a small
Correct.
company, and like
Yes.
even bank statements you want to see, but let's say they're not available. You structure the deal as an earnout, right? I'm going to
Yep.
give you a certain amount of money each
Yep.
month based on the revenue. And I don't really need to see your bank statements because if I don't get revenue, I don't pay you, right? So
Yep.
you're right. You can definitely firewall a bunch of these, but those
So,
are
well, the
the major
second
ones.
thing I was going to say out of this that, now we're talking about getting, once you go, and we're getting towards the end here, but we talk about the purchase agreement and the disclosure state, basically getting the attorneys involved in this whole attorney fatigue and deal fatigue that Dan's talking about. Some things I have learned. Number one, you and the owner or the buyer or whomever, the seller, you need to be buds, period, dot. Like you need to have conversations where no one's involved. Okay. Meaning that I say, there's low trust. And because what's going to happen is attorneys are going to plant seeds in your brain you never even knew existed. Attorneys are going to plant scenarios in your brain that, I mean, you would think that someone is like legitimately looking. I mean, it's almost like you're going to lose money just by even talking to those people. I mean, that's the mindset you'll get
Think
after
about
go.
how many. This is it's a good example, but how many divorces start out as okay, we're going to do everything in a friendly manner and everything, and we'll just split everything, and then the lawyers get involved, and
Oh,
it just turns into a dumpster fire.
well, and
That's
that's the whole point I want to make here is that you need to be buds with the buyer or the seller. You need to have converse. And here's what I will tell you, something I have learned that I've done, at least off the top of my head, I know at least 4 deals. And the best ones are where I know the owner or the buyer or whatever. And we get on a call with the attorneys and we go through, because what's going to happen is you're going to throw out an agreement. The other attorney is going to contest it and say, oh my gosh, look at all this, so one-sided. And it may very well be. And then there's going to be this part where you're going to have to start horse trading, where you have to start figuring out, like, what are we going to do? And the best thing that you can do in those scenarios is create a conference call. You get that person's attorney, you, the buyer, seller, whatever, and their attorney. Everyone's on the call, and you go by it, item by item. Because otherwise, what happens is that you're going to sit there and you're going to spend a boatload of money. You're going to be super frustrated. The deal's going to drag on and on and on. And you may not get out of it what you want versus like, the way I did it in the past was I would get the initial thing from the attorneys. I would call the owner or seller or whatever and say, hey man, let's go through this. What are you thinking on this? What can we do this? And we would kind of come up with this kind of, napkin agreement. And then we'd call the attorneys and we say, this is what we're doing. And then it just all gets settled, because otherwise, I swear, man, it's like the freaking scene from the
well,
Lord
a
of the
good
Rings.
attorney will separate legal issues and business issues. And business issues are everything. They'll throw them back at you and say, hey, you got to negotiate this.
Yeah.
The legal issues, that's what you want them to negotiate. The indemnity
Correct. I agree with that.
like that. So,
and it gets really muddy and really emotional.
Very emotional.
Yes.
And that's, but a really good deal is one where everybody's a little pissed off at the end. And, that's been my experience.
You're right. Yeah. It's so, it's so true.
So anyway, okay. So we get this contract. It goes back and forth to the attorneys. Everything's good. And I'm, we're hurrying through this. It usually takes several back and forths. It's a tennis match. Don't take it personally when you start to see things that you're like, wow, I built this company from scratch and I'm not going to, don't worry about it. The lawyers have a way of really So that's why you get in a room with the seller, like Donnie said, and kind of just, say, okay, well, this is what we want to do. So then finally, when everything is good, we have a closing. Usually the closing could take place at a lawyer's office. It could take place anywhere you want. Most of the big ones that we do are all online, right? All the signatures are electronics and money gets wired, but it doesn't have to be that way. You could go down and pick up a check, a certified check or whatever, and get that done. So, and then the big thing is the integration, post-merger integration. And that's where the Jack Welch axiom comes up, that if the cultures don't line up, it's going to be bad, right? Because what you're going to do is you're taking on a bunch of technicians who supposedly know your way of doing things, and maybe managers or salespeople, and you may have to make adjustments to their, how they do business, and so that integration goes on for quite a while. And depending on how the contract is written, there may be some money riding on how you do over the next year. And so the buyer and seller have to be on the same page. Okay, you're going to get dinged if we don't do certain numbers, but I'm going to change things up so I control it.
Yeah,
so
that's a really important point. And again, I know we're getting at the end here, but something to really think about, which is, yeah, you're giving over control, but you also have money riding on performance. And there's stupid buyers and there's stupid sellers. I mean, just period dot that do dumb things. And just, I think we could spend a whole episode on just talking about integrations, because they are they're so easy to screw up and so hard to get right. But if you do them right, it's fantastic. They're hard to do. So, all right. Anything else before we finish out here, Dan?
I think that's it. We kind of had a jam-packed episode. If there's anything that we'll put some of these, I'll put these notes up on the website.
Yeah, I think that's good. Yeah. So just a reminder for those that are, just a reminder that all the resources, and we'll put up some notes from this episode as well. It's available on the podcast website, pmpindustryinsider.com. Just take a look under show notes for this episode. As always, we appreciate any support that you give us. Dan and I are highly compensated for this podcast, meaning that we don't get compensated. So we absolutely love ratings, reviews. Complaints go to Dan. Good reviews go on there. Otherwise, I'd say that's pretty good. And as always, if you, our goal legitimately with the podcast is just to help folks in the industry. So if you share it or tell others about it, we'd greatly appreciate it. And with that, we're going to sign off. We'll see you all next time. Take care now.
Thank you.
Bye.